Hi friends, welcome to this episode of the Senior Rehab Project. I'm Meg Lowry, just recording from Australia. I'm just going to pop in and out every now and then with a few interviews, being quite opportunistic here. And when I come across a great researcher or a research project that is of interest to our community, I will try to get on the line and interview that person and ask them all the juicy questions. So today, without further ado, I just want to introduce to you Jennie Hewitt, soon to be almost, pretty much, we could just about say it now, Dr. Jennie Hewitt, who has just had her thesis accepted, I hear. Congratulations.
Thank you, Meg. It's a big relief.
Yeah, I'll bet a long time coming, and this probably feels like you've been beating this drum for a very long time, but the world has only just recently heard about your quite impressive research project, the SUNBEAM Trial. We've talked about it a little bit in the Senior Rehab Project Facebook group, and so I just wanted to get you on today to tell us about the SUNBEAM Trial. I think it's a bit of a game changer in the world of residential aged care and what exercise can deliver for residents in the aged care setting. So we're going to talk about that, and then I'm going to pick your brains about some other cool things that you're doing, because some of us have seen a very short snippet of a video of you doing some silent disco activity in your aged care.
Yeah, not bad. Not a bad way to spend a Wednesday morning at work, I think.
It looks like so much fun. I want to know how you do it. So let's go through SUNBEAM first, because it's just such an extraordinary contribution to the body of literature around how to prevent falls in an aged care facility. So I won't read out the whole abstract, but I'll get you to summarise for us what the trial was about and who the participants were, and what the methodology was behind it, and then your outcomes. Is that all right? Do you want to start with that?
Sure.
Okay.
So the SUNBEAM trial is a cluster randomised controlled trial, meaning that we recruited aged care facilities, and we then had to go inside the aged care facilities and try to invite participation from the residents. So there's two levels of recruitment. First of all, to find the facilities, and then to find the residents within them. We had 16 aged care facilities and 221 residents who participated to join the trial. And this sort of went on over about a 6-year period. And the villages were recruited in pairs, and then baseline measures were taken by me, and then after that they were randomised. The facility itself was randomised to be either the centre that would receive the exercise program, or the centre that would receive just usual care.
Right.
So do you want me to talk a little about what the intervention was? Is that where you want to go next?
Or maybe before the intervention, can you tell us who you included and who you excluded? Because I was pretty impressed with how inclusive you were with your participants. It seemed to me from reading the study that you were really trying to be including pretty much anyone who'd be able to participate in an exercise program. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I really wanted to make sure that people were given an opportunity to exercise if they wanted to. So when I initially wrote the protocol along with the rest of my supervisors and our research team, we kept it pretty broad, but then when trying to publish the protocol, they did ask us to be more specific on certain factors. I'll explain that more in a minute. Mm-hmm. So what we really wanted to do was make sure that anybody who was a permanent resident of an aged care facility who would like to participate in the trial was welcome to do so, unless they had we had a 12-month follow-up period. So this wasn't designed as exercise for in a terminal palliative setting. So if people had a short-term prognosis or a terminal or unstable illness, that was one of the reasons that one of the exclusion criteria. Mm-hmm. But apart from that, whether or not you had a diagnosis of dementia or other comorbid conditions, we wanted people, even with a whole swag of comorbid conditions, to be allowed to join in if they chose to. The the paper was published, the protocol was published, and we were asked to give specific scores about cognitive impairment. What we really wanted to say was, if you've got a cognitive impairment, that doesn't matter as long as you can participate safely in a group exercise. But that wasn't enough for the scientific world. They wanted a score, so we ended up saying if you had a mini mental score of 15 or over, you could be included, so 15 out of 30 or over. Parkinson's disease was another one. You could join in if you had Parkinson's disease, but if your Parkinson's precluded you from safely being able to participate in a group setting, or any other health condition got in the way of being able to participate in a group setting, that was the exclusion criteria. That was about it.
Completely reasonable.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, now get to the exercise intervention. It's pretty exciting stuff.
It was. So I was really fortunate because at the time, at the commencement of the trial, I really just wanted to make the point that physiotherapists in Australian residential care could offer things other than TENS or massage, which is all we're funded to do under the aged care funding instrument. And so I had thought that if we introduced an exercise program and looked at quality of life, falls outcomes, falls efficacy, mood, those sorts of things, that would be a good place to start. And then right at the time that I was thinking about what exercises to prescribe, Kathy Sherrington and Ann Tiedemann published a paper on best practice exercise for falls prevention. So that pretty much handed me on a silver platter a protocol of best evidence exercise at that time. They were a bit cautious about whether it was going to work in resi care because there wasn't enough studies on it. But the bottom line was that they were saying 50 hours of exercise over 25 weeks, so that's 2 hours a week. Resistance training or strength training if you're deconditioned. Balancer is paramount. Progressively and individually tailored and upgraded for people, high challenge balance exercise. So I basically worked with my supervisors to come up with a protocol that included all of those components. And what we discovered when we looked at the handful of exercise trials out there in the residential aged care setting was that none of the other trials that had researched exercise in that setting had been formulated using those key components. So I was really lucky to have those components published just when we were setting up the protocol, because we just implemented them and measured that. Yeah.
And I mean, I did read that Tiedemann Sherrington systematic review, and what's really cool is that you picked up on the whole resistance training if they're deconditioned, because I mean you can easily read through that systematic review and go, meh, resistance training, take it or leave it from what they'd written. You know, they'd said strength exercises can be added, you know, something like that in their recommendations, because they were very much on up to 3 hours a week of balance, high intensity balance training. Strength exercises can be added, but I like that you recognise that their recommendations were more about the community dwelling older adults. They didn't have as much to go on in the residential care facility, and it's in resi care where we've got these really deconditioned people where strength does become quite important.
Yeah, and I've been working for a few years in residential care and noticing that people were gradually becoming more and more deconditioned if they weren't offered appropriate exercise programs, and a lot of villages don't make space for I was just working at that stage as a contract physio that would go for maybe 4 to 6 hours a week in a number of different villages, and some of the villages implemented exercise programs, and others just implemented a program where the diversional therapy team might put a video on and the whole class was done in sitting and so on.
Yeah.
But that might go for 20 minutes or half an hour, and then for the other 23 and a half hours they're sedentary. So deconditioning was a massive component of the clinical presentation of these people, and I felt that unless it's no good shooting your foot out to the side quickly and maintaining your balance if your quads are so weak that even though you shot it out quickly, it buckles underneath you.
That's right.
So it's not just reacting quickly, you've got to have the strength to hold yourself upright. So it just made sense, and that's why that was included.
Okay, so if we talk about the actual intervention, it's my understanding that you used, my favourite equipment is the HER equipment, the pneumatic resistance, because you can increase the resistance by like 100 grams at a time.
Yeah.
Not cheap, but really pretty cool machinery. How did you go getting that machinery into your residential care facility? Did you have to pay for it, or were you able to just rent it, or?
No, I had a meeting early on. I was working with a colleague, Chris Turner from Allied Connect, who had just been to Europe and been really impressed with her equipment. And when he knew that I was going to be looking at setting up an exercise program in residential aged care, he put me in touch with Mats Manderbacher, who is the owner, director of her health and fitness equipment. So he contacted me, and we had a talk about my study and the fact that I was going to be getting people to perform strengthening program as well as the balance program. And at that stage, I didn't really know, to be perfectly honest, I didn't know if I wanted to go down the fancy gym equipment line or down the much more readily accessible, maybe Velcro weights or backpack with weights in it or something like that would be easily transferable. But what I did know was that the research at that point was pointing towards the fact that exercise programs didn't really seem to help in residential aged care. Yeah. And so I needed to make sure that if I was going to invest all of this time and effort into performing a study, that I was going to be delivering really personalised and sort of scientifically prescribed upgraded programs. And it's really hard to do that with a bunch of Velcro weights. Whereas with the HER equipment, I could sit people down. I could go, okay, Mary, you can do, on the initial assessment, I'd have a look at what she could safely do, what resistance she could safely lift, say, between 10 and 15 times. Yep. Two sets to start with, or 3 sets. So 2 to 3 sets of 10 to 15 reps. So mostly I was starting on 2 sets of 10. If she got to the end of the second set of 10 and when she was still saying that her perceived exertion was that it was moderately difficult, then I knew that was the weight for her. Then the next person would come in, Molly would come in, and I'd do the same for her, and I'd do the same for Peter, and so on. So that in the end I'd have 5 people being able to exercise at the same time, and HER equipment would have their program saved on it. So they'd be doing their own individualised weights and their own individualised sets and reps, and I could be supervising them, or I could even have a trained volunteer supervising them, because the equipment was specifically loading, uses a computerised software, specifically loading what they'd been prescribed and recording what they'd actually done. So that meant that it was really personalised, and I knew that people were what people were achieving. It's harder to do that in a group.
So, absolutely. So it's great that you can get people together but still individualise the intervention. So for the people out there who aren't familiar with HER equipment, HUR, we're not getting kickbacks from this company, by the way. Really
no, and they took a risk. It could have gone the other way. I could have used their fancy equipment and it might have made no difference.
For years, and then you might have printed and published to say, it doesn't work.
and so they did take a risk on, and they certainly never asked for anything from me, except continuing with the study, not pulling out halfway through, which I never would have done anyway. I was like a dog with a bone.
Yes, you got your bone. So the HER equipment, they have cards, don't they? So that there's like a little digital card that each participant has. They put it into the machine, and then you get to say the settings on that particular machine, like what the resistance is dialed up to, and also even correct me if I'm wrong, because I've seen it in other places, but I haven't had the luxury because I'm in home health and community rehab, so I haven't been able to sort of use it,
carry it around in the boot.
But you put the person puts the card in, and you've already pre-prescribed the settings, not only of the resistance but also like the position and angles of the lever arms. Is that right? So
yes.
It kind of moves into the position that is suitable for that person's height and shape. Is that correct? Is it that cool, or am I a bit wrong?
It's almost that cool, not quite. Yeah. No, I actually think that there are other machines. HER stands for Helsinki University Rehab. Mm-hmm. So the machinery comes from Finland, and I think there might be machines in Finland that do that automatic adjustment, but that I didn't have access to those. The machines that I used, I could prescribe on a separate computer, not attached to the machines. I would prescribe for each of the machines the resistance, the sets and the repetitions, and then I would put a comment in saying, for example, adjust the backrest to setting 3 before commencing, or limit the knee extension, or limit the hip flexion, or whatever. And so as soon as the person, that's all saved onto a card that looks a bit the size of a credit card.
Yep.
And then the resident takes the card with them from machine to machine, and my volunteers or diversional therapists pop the card in, and it pops up and it'll say, if it was you, it'd pop up and say, hello, Meg. And then it would automatically set the resistance, and then it would say, before commencing, change the knee angle to 90 or whatever.
Yeah, right.
And then the assistant comes along and does that.
And does that for you.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Cool. I think it's the way forward with prescribing exercise for that population.
Yeah.
So what machines did you select? Tell me your circuit. So first of all, how long were they exercising at a time? So an hour?
Yeah, so the whole class was an hour.
Yep.
Yeah, an hour and twice a week. And it included, there were 5 resistance machines. There was one for hip abduction and adduction, so one machine, and the person sits on it, and the machine it uses pneumatic, so it'll resist abduction. And then once they've completed those sets with a rest in between, which I can also prescribe however long the rest has got to be, then you press touch the screen and it switches over and it resists the opposite direction.
Yep.
So abduction and adduction. Mm-hmm. Knee flexion and extension was another machine.
So hamstrings, quads.
Quads. Then there was a leg press.
Yep. Quads, glutes.
Yep. Then there was tricep dip. So I chose that one. I had access to 5 machines.
A tricep dip machine.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the idea, what my thinking on that one was that people have trouble getting out of their chairs.
Yeah,
and so it's good. It's good for if we can strengthen up their legs, but it's also quite good if we can strengthen their arms. And also, if they start to tip and they put their arm out to catch themselves, you want them to be able to prevent
load the arm. Yeah,
load the arm, prevent their elbow from buckling. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I chose that one too. And then the last one was called abdomen back. So that they're sitting and they do a version of an abdominal crunch, more or less, and then it turns around and they do a version of back extension. Yeah.
Yep.
I wasn't really sure about that one when it started, and then the residents loved it, much to my surprise, especially the back extension. That kind of wasn't sure what I thought about that initially. But I think because there are a lot of people that have kyphotic spines, that pushing back against it and getting a bit of extension, and as they do it, the roller that they're pushing against, it rolls up and down their back and gives them a bit of a massage while they're at it. And so it seemed to be rather popular, and I was surprised. So I had to eat my humble pie on that one.
Yeah, that would be the one I'd have reservations to, particularly with the resisted flexion. I mean, if they have osteoporosis or if they have prolapse or incontinence, I'd be worried about that abdominal pressure for those, pelvic floor conditions, but also just resisted spinal flexion for osteoporosis. I don't love it, But it's good. It was included, and you had no clinical incidents?
We had no clinical incidents. I might just say for the record, I didn't choose that one. That came as part of the package.
Yeah.
But then, it was popular. I had no incidents with it, and certainly the program has proven benefits. So there we are. I stand corrected.
And the balance component. So let's actually think, if we divide this up into approximately 60 minutes, there's always lost time here and there, but what percentage of time was resistance and what percentage of time was balance?
If all ran according to schedule, it was about 50-50.
Yep.
What often happened, though, was that residents felt like the real exercise was the gym equipment.
Yep. And
they'd skip along through the balance stuff, and then there'd be a lineup waiting for the machine. So I'd have to try and control that. But the plan was that it was around 50-50. So because I only had tricep dip and no other upper limb exercises, I included standing bicep curls, so that it became a bit of a balance and a resistance exercise. So they stood. I had a sheet on the back of a number of chairs or parallel bars if the village happened to have parallel bars. I didn't provide those. And basically a laminated sheet that had a circuit of exercises, a number of laminated sheets with circuit exercises for balance as well. So if somebody finished, for example, on the leg extension, leg curl machine, and they're waiting to use the next one, they'd go across to the balance area and they might pick up the TheraBand. They'd stand. The options where they could stand with feet hip width apart, and the TheraBand, the varying colours according on to where each person was at. Stand on the TheraBand, and then there was instructions, and I had to spend most of my time around the balance, or if it wasn't me, whoever the leader was, spent most of their time supervising the balance. That's the beauty of the other exercises. They were all performed sitting, and the machine was telling people what to do. So they didn't need a lot of supervision on the machines. You could do it from standing over in the balance area. But in order to make people safe while they were doing the balance exercises, we had to physically be standing in the balance area, and then you could give them really high challenge balance work while the rest of the group did their strength work. So that sort of helped with staffing levels.
Sure.
So they did standing bicep curls, and they either had their feet at hip width apart, or they had the feet side by side, or they had them in semi-tandem or tandem standing. So it was a combination of balance and
standing bicep curls in tandem standing.
Only went the really good ones, and only near the end of the 50 hours. But they certainly didn't start there, but that's where they progressed to.
That's awesome. And the bicep curls is good for biceps, but also probably even more so important for the internal perturbation generated from that motion.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And which I tried to focus, a lot of people, especially if they're using a walking aid, and over 80% of my participants used walking aids. So they spend a lot of time, and if it's a four-wheelie walker, in more of a kyphotic position, that's stooped. No matter how hard we try to make sure the aid is the right height and so on, there is a lot of forward. So one thing that I found really helped them, I think, too, was standing in alignment before they started the bicep curl. So getting themselves really standing tall, shoulders down and back, core activated, all that whole thing, and then introducing the bicep curl. So they were taught about how to do those things as they progressed. Then the other thing that they were doing in standing with the TheraBand was keeping their elbows tucked into their side and their hands in front with a TheraBand. Elbows bent to 90 degrees, and then externally rotating the shoulder. So trying to work on retracting the shoulder, both scapulally, pulling the shoulder blades down and back, and trying to reduce that whole thoracic kyphosis that we see in a lot of people standing nice and tall. Then they did heel raises and toe raises. They did what we called recovery steps. So they're standing with either two hands on the chair or the parallel bars, or one hand, or just a couple of fingers, or no hands. That was how we progressed the balance component.
As per
and they would fall. Yeah, that's right. And they'd step their foot out to the side, and we go falling, catch. So it wasn't meant to be hip abduction in standing. It was meant to be actually falling to the right and catching yourself with your foot. Nice. And falling to the left and catching yourself. So we called them recovery steps. And then falling backwards and catching yourself by shooting your foot out to the back. Right. So that's where we made sure we had somebody standing right behind them, hands at the ready near the pelvis, just in case we had to stabilise them, but otherwise trying not to touch them and let them do the exercise.
And that was it wasn't reactive, because they were still anticipating what they were doing. They weren't waiting for you to prompt them.
No,
where to fall, but they still had to take a fast step when their balance was displaced when their centre of mass was, gone beyond their limits of stability. So they still would have had to have a volitional step.
That's right. And we got them, rather than sending their foot out to the side and then transferring their weight, we got them to transfer their weight and then shoot their foot out when they started to feel like they were going to tip. Yeah, that's right.
Nice.
Then we did a grapevine. So that was always a bit of an interesting one.
It's so hard, isn't it?
I know. So we'd start with either myself or one of the assistants standing face to face with our hands in front with our elbows bent to 90 degrees. Then the resident would have their hands in the same position and hang on to us almost as if we were a forearm support frame. So our hands are held cupping their forearms.
Yep.
So they feel really steady.
Yeah.
And then we just start by going say we're going to the right. We're going to step right, then bring together, and then step right together. And we're going to transfer sidestepping all the way down the room. And then we're going to transfer sidestepping to the left all the way back. And then once they got the hang of that, we'd try to do, okay, we're going to step out and then step in. So we'd step out with the right, cross over in front with the left. Step out with the right, cross over behind with the left.
Yep.
And so there was quite a bit of sort of guidance, just prompting and a little bit of physical tipping to the side so they'd get the idea of stepping out. And then we'd have to be, say, out in front, out behind, out in front, out behind. And sometimes you just end up with everybody's legs tied up like a pretzel. But nobody ever fell doing it. But I tell you what, it's not for the faint-hearted. It would take a bit of courage.
I teach it all the time. It's like one of my bread and butters because I insist that, about half of the time when you do a lateral, when your balance is displaced laterally, you will actually just abduct the foot to the leg to catch yourself. But the other half of the time, people actually do a crossover step to catch themselves. So if they don't have that motor memory, then 50% of their lateral falls, they're not ever going to have a chance in catching them,
No, because they're all tied up. Yeah,
it's approximately 50% when I looked at Brian. I think it was Brian Mackey's research on stepping reactions, and I went, wow, it's about half, I might be misquoting in there, but something like that. About half the time that they do a lateral fall, we need to do a crossover step, or people initiate a crossover step. So if that's not available to them, if they don't have that motor memory, then we're just going to impact the hip.
That's right.
Nice. And did some people get to the point of not requiring hands-on support for their crossover stepping?
Not for the grapevines. They were basically got down to a finger on each side. Yeah. So I think if I'd have done, that's a good point, Meg. I didn't do this, but it might have been a good idea. If they step out and cross over, and then, so if you step out with your right, cross over with the left, and then put the left one back where it belonged, instead of going step out, cross over, step out, cross over, like I was just doing this continuous grapevine to the right and then grapevine to the left sort of thing. Yeah. But it might have been better to, it might have been
or have started there.
Beneficial to start with that, Didn't think of it though. Good idea.
Oh, well, second
not happening.
Any more to that intervention that we should know about?
They did a reaching one too. So we had people reaching out of their base of support. So they would stand at the table side on, and I'd have 2 cups, one with a whole lot of marbles close and one with an empty one out further, and they'd reach across and pick the marbles up from one cup and drop them in the other, and then they'd turn around 180 degrees and do the same thing on the other side.
Right, so they'd pick up the whole cup? They wouldn't?
No, they'd pick up a marble at a time.
Okay, yep.
So they sort of rock over and then rock back. I used to tell them to imagine that they were standing on a ship. Yep. And when they rock over, they drop the marble in, and then they rock back and they pick a marble up, and then they rock over and drop the marble in. So it's that whole sort of side-to-side motion,
And so how many did you have participating at any given time?
Well, I had stations to provide space for 10 participants at a time. Yep. And that's how we anticipated it would run, but we didn't always get all 10 at every class. So that's how that's right. And so that's how it was designed, but there was never more than 10 in a class, but there was often less than 10 in a class.
Yeah, and you'd have about half of them doing balance and half of them on the machines.
Yeah. And so then if we staffed it at to help us to 5 participants. If I had, for example, 16 participants from a village, then and 6 of them had a more severe cognitive impairment or other comorbid conditions that meant that it was hard for them to get on and off the machines and they were a bit slower, then I would get the quicker ones in a group of 10 and then bring the slower ones or the ones that needed more one-on-one support into the smaller group, and so then it'd be two participants to 3, one participant to 3, one helper to 3 participants. So that's how I did it for people with higher care needs.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so outcome measures, obviously you measured falls over that period of time and compared to the control groups, which were the other facilities that were in the cluster randomized trial but did not have the intervention. And you can tell us the falls results, but I also want to know what other outcome measures did you measure and what changed and what didn't change?
So we measured quality of life using the SF36 and the Euroqual 5-dimension, 5-level questionnaire. The reason for doing both is because when I started this, it was 7 years ago that we started talking about it, and 6 years ago that we implemented the protocol. At that stage, the EQ5D5L is a much smaller questionnaire and easier to offer to people, but it had never been used in residential aged care, so we didn't know whether it worked. So we did it with the SF36, thinking that we'd have a look, and if they both agreed with each other, we'd publish a paper on that.
Yes.
But of course, by the time I finally finished my results, this was one of my secondary outcomes. Other people had shown that they were comparable. Wish I'd known that in the beginning, because then I didn't have to advance to do the SF36 as well, which is really time consuming.
Yeah.
But anyway, the beauty of hindsight. So we did
next time.
Yeah, Euroqual all the way. So we didn't, unfortunately, find a statistically significant difference in between group difference in that outcome.
Okay.
But there was a trend towards it, but it wasn't big enough to show it to reach statistical significance.
Okay.
We did this short physical performance battery, which is a 3-part test: a time chair stand, a gait speed test, and a balance test. And there was a statistically significant improvement in the people that did the exercise program.
Woohoo.
So we suspect that the improved balance and gait and functional strength was what contributed to their reduced falls.
And how much was the difference? What was the difference between
P was 0.02. So quite significant, strong.
Yeah, so that's the p value, but I might get myself a bit confused because I'm no researcher. But what was the actual, the average scores of one group versus the average score of the other group?
You got me now. I'll have to go and look that up.
I love the SPPB because I think, in the back of my mind anyway, I just think the minimal clinically important difference is 1. Because it's out of 12, right? So there's 3.
That's right.
And each of them is 4 points. And then the MCID is 1. So I'm just it's so easy to kind of,
improve it.
Yeah.
The effect size, if I remember rightly, and I might even have to correct myself on this. You'd think I'd never forget it because it's been my life's work for 6 years, but there's been a lot of water under the bridge. Yeah, I think it was 3.
Oh, really?
I think so, but I could be wrong, so I apologise, everybody, if I've got that wrong. And I'll have to go and read my own paper and see what that was.
At a later date. In the Facebook group. And you know what I was thinking, Jenny, before we do the big reveal of our falls rate reduction, I was also thinking, when you and I are we're presenting, both of us, at AAG conference, the gerontology conference in November.
Yay.
So we're going to be able to catch up face to face then. Why don't we do a little video where you show me the balance exercises, and we actually video those exercises, like with the cup and with the TheraBand, how you stand, how you take the grapevine. We'll put that in the Australian Physiotherapy Association gerontology group, but also in the Senior Rehab Project Facebook group for everyone to sort of really see it.
Yeah, great idea. Great idea. I'll pack the TheraBand.
Yeah, cool.
And the marbles. Or we'll improvise.
All right, I'll put them on right now. Silly. Remind me to pack TheraBand and marbles. Okay. So any other outcome measures before we talk about falls?
Yes, we tested cognition using the Addenbrooke cognitive evaluation, and sadly there was no change, because I'm sure there was going to be, but there was no difference between the groups. There was a trend on that one as well. The falls efficacy scale we used, the FES International.
It's a hard one in a resi care environment, though, isn't it?
Yeah, and that was my comment. There
really
wasn't
appropriate for that.
The questions aren't right.
The ADLs aren't really right. Yeah.
So it'll ask questions like, how concerned am I when I'm doing making my dinner or
Yeah.
cleaning the house or
walking
around the
ice.
block or walking on ice. Yeah. And the residents didn't do any of those things. So that one was tricky. So that's my take-home message for that. It was a good idea to measure confidence, but unless you've got a tool that's relevant for the participants, it's probably a bit of a big ask.
Yep.
Yeah, so really the primary outcome, there was a reveal coming in a minute, and then the secondary outcomes, the only one that they all trended towards improvement, but the only one that showed a statistically significant improvement was the physical performance measures.
It's such a good measure though. Gait speed, 5 times sit to stand, and then balance, feet together, semi-tandem, tandem. It's exactly what you'd be wanting to measure. Did the gait speed improve? Like, did you actually break it down into the different components of the SPPB?
Yeah, they all improved, and I think there might, if I can actually bear it, there might be a paper in that too. I just need a break from all that stuff for a little while. I only got my final notification that I don't need to write anything else about 10 days ago when I was in Lightning Ridge.
Okay, and so now the big reveal. This is the first study of any reasonable scale that has ever proven that exercise interventions reduce falls in a residential living facility, long-term care. And by what percentage did you reduce falls in that population?
It was a 55% reduction.
Booyah!
50%. There was a few cartwheels going on around the statistics office, and that doesn't happen very often. So that was exciting.
It was exciting.
So it was a strongly significant finding, and and as you said earlier, people have told me it's a game changer, so I certainly hope so.
It's a game changer.
We need to see evidence-based exercise in resi care. We've got to get away from giving TENS and massage and start
that's such a problem
being funded to
in
give
the Australian environment, isn't it? In nursing homes, we have a big US audience of the Senior Rehab Project, and they have different sort of acronyms. They have like SNF, SNF, which means skilled nursing facilities, and I think that somewhere, from my understanding, that is more of a longer term or maybe a slow stream rehab kind of facility, but there is still an exit. Like, I think people in a skilled nursing facility, from my understanding, and I might be wrong, Nicole Nixon will kick me if I am wrong, but people are in like a longer term but still rehab, so they can leave an SNF and go home, and that's still the goal, I believe. Whereas for us, the facility environment that Jennie did this study in was a nursing home facility, so high care and low care, Jennie. So people could have been high care or low care, but they are
high care or low care, permanent residents, and not expecting to go home. Although I did have one participant who got so strong she checked herself out.
Oh, legendary! That so never happens.
I know, it's really unusual in our setting. I was a bit worried that the facility might not be happy with me, but we all celebrated with her, and she actually said, when I go home, is it all right if I come back in Tuesdays and Thursdays to do my exercises?
What a sign that really made a profound difference to her life.
It did.
That is brilliant. Now, can we just, in a nutshell, I just want to reassure the audience that that you have gone above and beyond. After all of this effort with your clinical intervention, you've also gone the extra mile to do an economic feasibility study or write-up of the cost benefits to invest money in this kind of a program, and the savings that either a facility, or I would suspect more so the government, would make at the end of the day. Now, that hasn't been published yet, has it?
No, that's under review at the moment with Clinical Rehabilitation, an English journal.
Oh, so I probably can't say much about it.
No, well, we'll say a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll say what we can get away with. So I need to be careful about the incremental cost effectiveness ratio, but I can almost hear everybody nodding off as I say those words. I can tell. So what happens with cost effectiveness analyses is that we look at the cost of delivering the intervention versus delivering nothing, and then we look at the cost of falls as the primary outcome, and we apply. We make decisions then. If is it worthwhile investing in the program? Is there a cost saving compared to doing nothing? That's basically what the paper, in lay terms, what the paper is looking at. So I can give you some figures on in Australian dollars, and sort of practical application figures. I just can't give you the incremental cost effectiveness ratios and all those things that the publishers would want to be the first ones to release.
I wouldn't know.
I figured that too, and even though I've spent years getting, I've spent years with health economists who I thoroughly admire. Learning about this stuff, I still feel more comfortable with the lay stuff too.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, the gym equipment costs around $60,000 Australian to purchase up front.
Which is probably about 40,000 US-ish, maybe.
Yeah. And in a 70-bed aged care facility, the cost of delivering the falls, let's talk about the falls rate. So the falls rate, if you perform the program, is about 1.3 falls per person per year. If you don't do the exercise program, the falls rate is about 2.9 falls per person per year, so more than double. So then if you look at the cost of treating a fall, and if we're looking at the combination of the acute costs right there incurred by the I hate talking like in dollars, because the cost, of course, is the biggest cost is what's happened to the person on the floor and how it affects everybody else. But let's just put all that aside for a minute and become purely economical for a tick. The acute costs include what the nursing home has to deliver for nurse time, doctor perhaps to review, goes through Medicare in Australia, an allied health professional perhaps to review all that kind of stuff. If an ambulance is then called, there's that cost to put on top. If they're transferred to the hospital, there's that cost. If they're in the emergency room, and there's a cost associated with if they're admitted. There's more costs if they're sent home. There's still costs in the transportation. So these are the things that make up the cost. Then, of course, if the results of the fall, the consequences are that they go from being independently mobile to needing one to assist or two to assist in the full hoist or whatever, then there are those longer-term costs as well.
Yes.
So there has
this provision to that person when they become more dependent. Yeah.
Yeah. So Terry Haynes is an Australian researcher, the big man, who knows a lot more about this. No, I didn't. I just used one of his papers.
Okay.
I found a paper that he'd published talking about the long-term costs of falls, which are around about $1,700 Australian dollars per fall. If you look at the acute and long-term costs, that's the mean, the average cost of falls. And so then if you times that by 1.31 falls per year versus 2.91 falls per year if you don't do the program, there's a cost benefit in the very first year of $65,000 for the which basically cancels out the cost of your gym and your staff time, because a lot of the work was done by volunteers
in a year.
So in 1 year you've paid for your gym equipment, and then for every year thereafter you're just saving money on the falls. If you put that into the Australian context, only about 25% of residents in the aged care facilities participated in the trial, sometimes because they were excluded, and the biggest reason for that was because they weren't able to do group exercise with strong cognitive impairments. A whole lot of them also said they didn't want to join a research trial, but then when I moved in with the gym, they wanted to join into that. So I let them join in because I didn't want to be mean, but I couldn't include them in my study. So even if we look at the whole population of residents at aged care in Australia, and we say if only 25% of those people participated in the trial, in this kind of a program, there would be a potential cost benefit for the Australian health economy of $120 million, even if only 25% of them do it, compared to doing what we do now.
Yeah,
that's in a year. Yeah.
They have to listen. They have.
I've got good news on that one, Meg.
Okay, tell me.
Yeah. So with all of this information, I was very fortunate to present to the Minister for Aged Care, the Federal Minister for Aged Care, who is Honourable Ken Wyatt, and he was really, his main interest was in how we can help our residents. They like it's not that they don't like the economic analysis, but his main thing was like, wow, that really made a difference to people. I had some video footage of interviews from residents and how it had changed them. And he came to me, there was a number of other things being presented, but he came up to me, asked if I would go and see him afterwards, and he shook my hand and said, I want to assure you that this information will help does help provide evidence and will help us because we are undergoing a funding review. And so this is exactly the sort of information we need to make the change and justify it. And then I was put in touch with the people performing the aged care funding review, and they also thanked me for the paper and said that it was important work to help them with their new policies. And then about 3 weeks ago, I was at a conference in Brisbane, and a representative from the Department of Health presented after me. She hadn't heard my presentation, but she got up, she flew in, I was straight before lunch and she was straight after, and she presented the upcoming changes to the funding mechanism, and amongst it was new funding for therapy programs in residential aged care instead of the TENS and massage. Yay!
Wowza!
I know.
Look what you have done.
Well, not me on my own, but I think I probably helped a bit.
And Clemson and your whole team.
Kathy Refshauge, but also the Physiotherapy Association and other, there's been a lot of stakeholders, people who genuinely care, lobbying. But I think that the evidence has helped a bit too. So
I think this evidence is going to go a really long way. And you know what? I'm not at all to cast any shadow at all over what you've done, but what I think has also really helped is the studies before you that failed. Because from them we learn, so every other exercise intervention in an aged care facility that didn't achieve what they wanted to achieve, from them we learn where to go next and we fine-tune these processes. So, eventually the right person comes along and sees it through as you have. But, like you said, it was other interventions in the past that had helped you, and that systematic review from Gerrington came from collecting all the data from other interventions where people haven't been quite as successful. So I just want to recognise all of those researchers in the
I do too, because I felt there was a Cochrane review there was one in 2010 and I put the protocol together. We put the protocol together in 2011, and then there was another one in 2012. And at that stage there wasn't enough exercise trials to look for the authors to thoroughly look at what the exercise program entailed. So instead of that, they lumped every trial that looked at exercise into one group and just said exercise for falls prevention, and then found that there was no evidence that it was beneficial, and therefore that was the finding. But I also presented recently, and Ian Cameron was in the audience, who is the author of the Cochrane Review. So that was a bit of a knee-trembling experience. But what I said, and I know that that's why they had to do it, because there wasn't enough trials. But what I said was that my concern was I wanted to look at not just exercise in residential aged care, but what the exercise was. And if it wasn't working, was it because exercise doesn't work, or was it because they just hadn't yet found the right type of exercises? And when I looked closely at it, it was very clear that people had tried lots of things, but they hadn't yet fitted with the key components. And it was just timing that meant that I was lucky enough to come along when someone else, Kathy Sherrington, had put them together, and I could test it. So I think we absolutely have to acknowledge the prior researchers. And there was one research in particular by the author's name is Rosendahl, and they had done a functional strengthening program and balance, and they had shown it was sort of heading towards significance but not significant. But that also helped me make the decision to go with the Her gym equipment too, because I thought I would have had my money on that program. I would have bet that one would have worked.
I know. Yeah. They had a weighted vest. They were stepping up onto blocks.
Loved it.
A really good intervention.
A really good intervention.
Bread and butter what I would be prescribing, and yet it just wasn't making the grade in.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so that was really important.
That's it. We have learned from our successes, and even more so from past failures. I hate to say that word. All right. That is so cool. So, I mean, bravo.
Thank you.
There are people who are just driving themselves to work right now and going, boom, all of these different, light switching on in their head about different exercises that they're going to implement. There's going to be a lot more grapevining happening, probably.
Oh, hang on tight, kiddos.
And really, really grab the
That's it.
And people might just be able to, once they've got your cost benefit analysis published, might be able to actually put a case for better equipment and better staffing for exercise interventions worldwide, not only in Australia, I hope. So that's phenomenal, Jennie.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to be respectful of your time, and that's something that Dustin Jones says all the time, so he's going to smirk right now when he hears me say that, except he's like,
I'm actually having a lovely time. Thanks, Meg.
I wish I could put his accent on. I wish I could put his accent on. I'm going to be respectful of your time. I got that right. Okay, I'm going to be respectful of your time. Okay, I'm terrible at it. I'm going to give up. Anyway, I am. And I'm going to ask you give us a minute of a description of your silent disco. I know you're just exploring and having a bit of fun there, but tell us what music you chose and what you did and how you got them involved.
Well, the silent disco appealed to me because one of the exclusion criteria, as I mentioned earlier, was a severe cognitive impairment. And I just have no luck trying to introduce group exercise for our residents with a severe cognitive impairment. One-on-one sometimes works, but trying to do group exercise, I really lose them, and I've had trouble. And so someone approached our village. She goes by the name of the head dancing queen from Disco D Tours, which is a Sydney-based company, but she was on holidays in Byron Bay near where I live. She came to our village and said, well, I've been doing silent discos for hens parties, etc., but I've got an idea that it might work for older people as well. What do you think? And so we thought, well, let's give it a crack and see what happens. Well, just never seen anything more hilarious. So I walked in. I was not part of that initial discussion, so I just walked in on a Wednesday morning to work, and it was a bright sunny day in Byron Bay, and I could hear some singing, and while I looked out in the garden, and there's our residents literally boogieing around the garden. There was no music though. It was just everyone was getting down. And in the middle of the crew, there's this gorgeous little 20-year-old dance teacher wearing silver sequins hot pants and rainbow long socks. And she's the facilitator, and so everybody wearing headsets. The music is pumped through the headsets, and they can all hear the same music as each other, and they can hear the voice of the facilitator telling them what we're going to do next, and they dance in unison, and they just have the best time because you really lose your inhibitions when you can't hear yourself singing and you can't hear anything. You're immersed in the music. And what I noticed was that some of the residents there with a cognitive impairment who don't participate in other exercise programs were up there dancing, and they were also feeling rather proud that they knew what to do and they belonged, instead of feeling like they were confused and they couldn't fit in.
Yeah, very cool.
And so we took the disco then. I asked them if they'd come and work in our other higher care villages, especially with people that are cognitively impaired. And so we get down now it was once a week. It's dropped back to once a fortnight at the present time because our dancing queen from Disco D Tours has gone overseas, and so we're sharing a facilitator. But they come along, and Alison Harrington is the one to look up if you want to find out more about the silent disco, because I think she's onto something and we love it.
Oh, that's awesome. I really enjoyed my silent disco experience in Goa on the beach in India.
Oh, I bet you did. It was a bit of Bollywood dancing.
Yeah, really got into it. So if someone's, not in the Sydney area or even down under, and they wanted to try such an intervention just for the hell of it, would they get wireless headphones?
Yeah, Bluetooth wireless
headphones, and everyone's connected to the same music.
That's
and
it.
So about 10 of them or whatever. And then what kind of tunes are you pumping, like Elvis or earlier?
Well, no, actually not earlier, interestingly enough. So the program, I've got to be careful because it's their program. I've got to be a bit careful. But we have everything from ABBA to Bing Crosby to Fred Astaire, back up to Village People. We also do at one of our villages, one of our diversional therapist is a Zumba teacher, so we do a bit of silent Zumba there too. So you can the program from Disco Detours is a set program called Moves and Grooves, and they have a set moves and set music, and you'd probably have to get in touch with Disco Detours to get more information on how that goes. But otherwise you could try it with other music that if you're not in Australia and you can't get Moves and Grooves program, you could try the concept with other music and see how you go. You just have to be careful because, they've invested and in their program and they do an amazing job. So I'd rather sort of refer people over to them than,
Yes, they brought the
anything else. Yeah.
That's
their thing. That's their bag. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Meg.
joining me on the line, and I can't wait to nut out some more things with you in November when we're at AAG conference.
Yes, it's going to be great.
Check in on the Facebook group once we've posted this podcast episode. Once we've published it, I'll let you know so that you can. I'm sure people are going to ask you questions, so they can. I know you're not a big Facebook fan.
I'm getting better now that I'm not got my head in the thesis all the time.
Yeah. So Jennie's JENNIE. Hewitt, HEWITT. So you could probably just tag her in a question through the Facebook page, and we can all see the question that you've asked and see her answer, so we can all learn vicariously. But otherwise, how else could people get in touch with you if they needed to, Jen?
They can contact me via email if they'd like to. I'm Jennie, JENNIE Hewitt, HEWITT at feroscare, feroscare.com.au.
That's enough.
That's probably enough, I think. I guess you could Insta.
On your front door.
I won't give out my home address just at the moment, if that's all right.
All right. Well, that's excellent. Thanks so much. And I hope everybody's enjoyed this episode. And stay tuned. I will be tapping some more fabulous researchers on the shoulder to pick apart their studies and spill their wisdom out to the world. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.